Hello. So we're going to continue looking at the Sermon on the Mount. We've looked at the Beatitudes together, and we have looked at the section on what Jesus meant when he was talking about being salt and light. My section of the next bit is called the fulfillment of the law, and that's what we're going to look at today. That's Matthew 5, verses 17 to 20. And let me read that to you. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. These verses can be a sticking point for some Christians. I've heard people say that because Jesus died on the cross for us so that we could be forgiven, we don't have any reason to be obedient to anything he says, because we can be just forgiven for it anyway. Grace to the point where nothing we do matters. And whilst it is true that there is nothing that Jesus won't forgive, this doesn't mean that we should live in a way purposefully that is contrary to how Jesus calls us to live. As Jesus says, the law still stands. And it is that total fulfillment of that law is found where? That total fulfillment of found is found in one place, in a person, in Jesus Christ. So if we want to truly live in that freedom that Jesus died for us, then there is an aspect of surrender and obedience to a way of living that we might not want to do. What was it that Jesus didn't like about the Pharisees? Was it that they were teachers of the law? No, that wasn't Jesus' problem with them. Was it that they were calling people to follow the law? No, that wasn't Jesus' problem either. Jesus' problem with the Pharisees was that they knew the law, was that they told others to follow the law, but they were so bound up in their power and their position that they had become hypocrites and slaves to the law, not children of God. And by becoming slaves to the law, they were living falsely, or as we might say in modern day language, they were living religiously. For example, the law says that they're called to give 10% of what they had to the temple, which they did with much pomp and circumstance so that everybody could see. They had plenty to give, so 10% was easy for them. And yet, the sick and the lame were on the steps of the temple, and they had to step over these people, and they stepped over these people and simply ignored them. Whilst following the law, the Pharisees had lost sight of God's heart for his people. They were bound by the law, and so it seemed that many of them didn't have a relationship with God. So bound by the law that these Pharisees, these teachers of the law, were right in the eyes of the law, but they weren't righteous before God. And yes, the law is fulfilled in Jesus Christ, but he calls us to follow him. And as Jesus lives a life and lives a way that adheres to the law and surrenders to the ways of God, to the ways of the kingdom of God, he lives differently to the ways of this world. Jesus' life shows us what a life that adheres to the law looks like, but walks in the righteousness of God as well. And we today, 2,000 years on, are called to be followers of Jesus Christ. People who live lives and walk like him. That means following his ways. That means being obedient to him. This doesn't mean that we should live lives where we can just go about and do what we like. Because when we live Jesus' way, there will be a sacrifice. There will be a lifestyle change for us. Some of these changes will be in line with the law because that's the way Jesus walked. But he walked in a way that shows us how to follow that way in freedom. A word on context. Jesus here, this is his first real public recording of a message to a large group of people. Okay, this is one of his first public appearances, and who was Jesus speaking to? But he was speaking to the Jewish people. This was Jesus's public assurance that he hadn't come to destroy the Jewish faith. He was a Jew. He would follow Jewish law, but he would show a way in which the law could be opened up to all, for all, and would bring freedom for all and to all as well. I'm sure many of the Jewish extremists, when Jesus appeared on the scene, I'm sure they were rubbing their hands together, really excited for the Jewish rebellion that was to come. But similarly, I bet on the other side, there were many Jewish conservatives who were so unsure about Jesus' intentions of what he came to do. Jesus knew he had to pitch this right, and actually, because this is a big talk to a public Jewish audience. So, how did he set his intentions out? He set his intentions out perfectly and set them down the middle. He was a Jew and would live like a Jew, but this wouldn't mean being a Pharisee, because the Pharisees were so married to the law that they were right in the eyes of the law, but they weren't righteous before God. Jesus would model what righteousness before God looked like to the Jewish people. Up to Jesus, the main example they had of a way to live was the Pharisees. And Jesus is there saying the Pharisee way, the Pharisaical way, isn't the way. To paraphrase Jesus, he's saying Jesus is the way, he is the truth, and he is the life, not the Pharisees. Our response to Christ today will be, will we submit to him even when we don't want to, or even if we don't want to do something his way? And will we follow him even when we think our way is better? Why? Because Jesus' way is the way. As we're saying on Sundays, will we follow him?